Let's remember, all scientific evidence for the age of the Earth involves unprovable assumptions, because no human has witnessed all of Earth's history.
You apparently haven't even witnessed the history of this channel!
But guess what? We actually have the birth certificate for the Earth. It's in God's Word.
Just to let you know, this Nimrod is a young Earth creationist. They believe the Earth was created in the year 4004 BC, even though we have the unbroken history of cultures older than that. Heck, we have trees older than that! Check out the history of this channel, especially the early videos, and see how nothing has changed. These moronic arguments have been long debunked, and the creationists have nothing new. And while you're at it, why don't you like my videos and subscribe? Also, share it everywhere. Do something to get past the shadow banning. Their video was watched 113,000 times in 2 weeks, for crying out loud. Why are the rational voices always suppressed by the algorithm?
Think about this process. What happens? A rock is chemically tested for these parent and daughter atoms. You collect the samples, you do a chemical analysis. And here's how it works. You got the parent and daughter atoms that you've measured. If the decay rate has made constant...
Decay rate? I thought you said you were doing chemical testing. Now you're talking about radiometric dating. Do you not even understand the difference between the two? Chemical dating is stuff like fluorine absorption or nitrogen dating. He then goes into this unimaginably stupid analogy involving an hourglass and counting the number of grains that fell, even though that's not how an hourglass works either.
The reason, of course, is that you were there when the clock started. And that's the first assumption. The geologists have to assume the amounts of parent and daughter atoms at the beginning when the rock formed.
Lie! I'm not gonna keep screaming. This guy's a creationist, so my voice wouldn't last 30 seconds. Creationists are liars. We know that. No, you do not assume the ratio of parent to daughter isotopes at the start, because we know how the clock is started to begin with. You'd never know it by listening to morons like Snelling, but there are different kinds of radiometric dating, and they start from different events that set their clocks going. Just to have an example to work from, let's talk about potassium-argon dating, since he talks about that later in the video. This is a method used to calculate when a rock solidified. When a volcano erupts, argon-40 is able to escape. When it solidifies, it starts accumulating again due to the decay of potassium-40. Argon-40 has a half-life of over 1.2 billion years, so this can be used to date rocks that solidified anywhere from 20,000 years ago to 4.5 billion.
That is, the initial conditions must be known. You have to assume there were no green atoms in the bottom of the glass bowl at the beginning.
As I just showed, that isn't the case. We know that got reset the last time the rock was solidified. And as I said, there are all sorts of methods where the clock starts at various different times. There's also isochron dating, which works completely differently. Here, you don't need to know anything about the initial ratios or what event started the clock or anything like that in order to determine the age. In fact, isochron dating can be used to tell you the initial ratios.
But guess what? The scientists weren't there when the rocks formed. How do they know?
If you asked that question honestly, you would have easily been able to find the answer. But that isn't what the creationists do. They ask the question pretending there is no answer. And yes, scientists have schooled Snelling on this for decades. He knows he's lying.
They weren't there. They don't know. It requires an observer.
I wonder how creationist Nimrods think forensics works. There's no witness to a murder, so they come in with forensic science showing how the victim was murdered, blood, DNA, murder weapon, all that. Would the creationists really acquit the guy because no one was there at the time? There's no way to infer anything after the fact?
That's assumption number one. requires an observer.
That's your assumption, bucko.
Number 2, all the daughter atoms measured today must only have been derived by in situ radioactive decay of parent atoms.
It's not an assumption to anyone who actually understands the physics. But then you believe a magic man in the sky made all of the animals just appear out of nowhere in their present forms. So we know how seriously to take you.
And then assumption number 3, the radioactive decay rate must have been constant at today's measured rate. But have the scientists been there for millions of years measuring these decay rates? No. We measure the rate today and we extrapolate backwards.
Ah, yes, this is the old things must have been different back then because we say so, even though all of the available evidence says otherwise. Way back in 2007, long before this avatar was even a sketch on a computer screen, I made a video debunking the creationist claim that the speed of light was much faster in the past, which they need in order to explain why we see things in space further out than 6,000 light years. What evidence do they have that the speed of light was faster in the past? None at all. What mechanism do they have for the speed of light decay? None at all. But it matches their religious whack-a-mania, so it must be true. I used observations of supernova 1987A, which is 168,000 light years away. I made an argument from contradiction, showing using basic trigonometry that the only way this could be true is if the universe were actually older, not younger. Creationist Malcolm Bowden actually responded to this, showing my hideous blunder. So in a follow-up, I debunk his claim, a baseless assertion made completely without any evidence that for some reason we're seeing things happen in space in slow motion. This is how far creationists have to go to defend their crap. They have to make time flow at a different rate. He also had to deny relativity and say space was actually Newtonian. Anyway, how it relates to this claim is observations of emission lines characteristic to the decay of cobalt-56 as well as cobalt-57. I showed how that decay rate had to be constant or else the math just wouldn't work out. And in another contradiction, changing the decay rate in the past to make the supernova work out would make the fossils and rocks here on Earth older than what radiometric data shows, not younger. And to bring it all home, in 2010, I made a video for Dick Coughlin's Ponage Olympics responding to more of Bowden's claims. I put a pin in it once and for all by using basic trig to show that the observations of the constant speed of light and constant decay rate must be true or else basic trig is wrong. And I'm going to link to one more video too, a quickie about measuring things. See, the creationists only look at one thing at a time, like carbon dating or the speed of light. They never talk about why all these independent dating methods agree. We never rely on just one method of measurement. We always look for independent ways of corroborating it and see if we get the same answer. And we always do. Radiometric dating, isochron dating, geochronology, dendrochronology, lichenometry, paleomagnetism, and all sorts of methods from chemistry, geology, biology, nuclear physics, astrophysics, cosmology, genetics, and every other way we have of deducing dates from the past all agree. Why? No creationist has ever dared to even acknowledge that, let alone answer it.
They document out of the literature the problems with these methods in terms of the assumptions that have been falsified.
Here's another tactic. They point to the few methods that have been falsified that science has discarded, or problems with the method that scientists know how to account for and claim that proves that none of these methods work. But again, it's not so much how do we know a particular one works, it's why do they all agree? Oh, and by the way, these problems and issues were discovered by scientists, not creationists. Science is self-correcting. Creationism just covers its problems with even more lies.
My friend and colleague Steve Austin went up and got some samples from lavas in the lava dome whose age we knew by observation.
And here's another one. They take a sample of a known age, pick a dating method that they know doesn't work within that range, in this case trying to use KAR dating on a sample only 10 years old, and pretend that it doesn't work in the range it is known to work in. Anyone familiar with KAR dating knows that if you get a result less than 20,000 years old or so, then the amount of argon-40 will be too little for our technology to measure or go beyond natural atmospheric levels, meaning the sample is too recent for that dating method to be reliable, and you need to use a different one. It's like complaining that you can't measure the time of a runner making the 100-yard dash using a calendar. Another method they've used in the past is radiocarbon dating on mollusks, when carbon dating requires carbon from the air, where the sun converts nitrogen-14 to carbon-14, when sea life doesn't get its carbon from the air, so we wouldn't expect carbon dating to work. That's actually most of his video, showing these so-called problems that wouldn't fool an expert for 2 seconds. But, as always, the creationists rely on an audience that is both ignorant and willing to just take their word for things because it props up their own religious beliefs.
Thus, there is no absolute scientific proof of the Earth's age. But, surprisingly, most dating methods give a young age for the world. In fact, it's been estimated that 90% of the measurements that have ever been used give a young age.
See, I don't even know how to respond to that level of dishonesty.
Let's look at comets. Comets are essentially dirty snowballs. They're made up of dust and ice that orbit through the solar system. But you see, as they get close to the sun, they disintegrate because particles come out of the sun, knock off pieces of ice and dust, which is why you've got the tail of the comet lit up by the sunlight. So they're crumbling, they're disintegrating. Now, everyone says the comets came into existence at the same time as the solar system.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean they were diving into the sun that whole time. Most of them were hanging around in the Kuiper Belt until gravitational perturbation knocked them into an elliptical orbit. But guess what? This liar is going to pretend they were doing that from day one.
And they say that was 5 billion years ago. But these comets are disintegrating so rapidly that in less than 10,000 years there should be none left.
See? But here's the problem. That means that the solar system can be no older than the youngest short-period comet. But we know there are short-period comets less than 2 centuries old. Before then, they were just hanging out in the distant solar system. Then astronomers noticed them coming into short, regular periods. Just look up Jupiter family comets. These are comets with much shorter periods than Halley-type comets and long-period comets. They have an orbital period less than 20 years. They got that short period because of gravitational perturbation from Jupiter and the other gas giants. For example, that recently happened with Comet 2019 LD2, a former Centaur comet that became a Jupiter family comet with a period of 12.3 years. By the way, it happens the other way too. We witnessed Comet Hyakutake increase its orbital period from 17,000 years to 70,000 because of gravitational perturbation of gas giants. Creationists want you to think that none of this ever changes. We know for an observed fact that it does.
When you start to take into account biblical assumptions, those thousands, tens of thousands of years ages crunch down to less than 5,000 years, back to the time of the flood.
Yeah, but isn't it funny how we don't see a major flood consistently in the geologic column to that age? We see all sorts of floods, but none consistent with a global flood 5,000 years ago, even though all of the geological eras are consistent worldwide, like the KPG boundary, for example. But no global flood. It would easily show up in ice cores taken in Antarctica. It also can't explain angular unconformities. And there are at least 25 places in the world where you can find the geologic column layered in its original order. Guess what? No consistent global flood. Not only do the creationists have to resort to anomaly hunting for support, There's all the evidence they have to just ignore.
But guess what? We actually have the birth certificate for the earth. It's in God's Word. The only certainty we have is the God-breathed eyewitness account in the Scriptures of the Earth's age and history.
How do you know? Were you there?
But they don't understand that those millions of years are an interpretation based on assumptions that reject the authority of God's Word.
Yeah, that's right. It's all a conspiracy to oppress you. Great scam to get the donation money flowing in.
That's a tragedy. You see, if we cannot trust Genesis on the young age of the earth, how can we trust God's offer of salvation?
Hate to break it to you, bozo brain, you can't! So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.